Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction, and I'm also one of your instructors in the courses. Today, it's my office hours, and I want to thank you doubly for joining me today. This is your chance to ask questions regarding food and cooking, and my chance to do my best to provide a solid answer to your questions, all right? A couple of items I want to touch upon as we get started. The first one is to please silence all cell phones. Just kidding. The first one is if you would like to participate more actively, more directly in today's show, go ahead and enter a question or a comment in the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And that'll make its way into the queue that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. And then the second item I'd like to touch upon is that within each question that you see already populated on the right-hand side of the screen is a heart-shaped icon. And if you'd like me to answer that question sooner than later, go ahead and click on that icon, and it'll push that question up in priority. Okay? I mean, otherwise, I will get to all the questions today. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into today's program. As we get started, I want to touch upon a topic of discussion, first of all, and that is knife cuts and the knife skills assignments in your course. Some of you have one, some of you have two of those assignments, depending on the course that you're enrolled in. Okay. And, I realize that each one of you are progressing at a different pace. Some of you have already done these assignments. Others are coming upon these assignments. But I want to mention, first of all, that knife skills are challenging. And so, with that, in mind, I just want to generally encourage you to keep on cooking, right? Keep on using that knife. And slowly over time, you're going to develop the comfort and the skills for better knife control. And, sort of central to this activity, to this experience, is this idea of muscle memory. And, muscle memory, of course, is this idea that your muscles sort of learn how to operate the way that you want them to, the way that you think they should. And that only comes with practice. And so repetition is going to be your friend. And some of you will get there very quickly. And others, it'll take a little bit more time. But, do understand that over a period of time, your knife skills will definitely improve along with your confidence, which is so important in the kitchen. Now, I'm going to share a quick story with you. I've got some tendinitis in my right hand, my right arm that I'm dealing with, my dominant arm. So I've been trying to use my left hand, including knife cuts. And boy, has this been an eye-opener for me. I can really empathize with many of you out there who are having a challenge with the knife cuts as you get used to using a knife in this new way. And boy, I have a hard time still getting my guide hand to do what I think it ought to do. It's just going in different directions. So it's a slow process. My results still have some room for improvement, but I have seen improvement over the last couple, 3 weeks or so. And so in a similar way, I'm confident that each one of you with repetition, with continued practice, will see improvement with your knife cuts. All right. Now, in terms of the assignments themselves, the knife skills assignments are, in my opinion, the most challenging of the assignments that you're going to encounter in the course in most cases, because the knife skills assignments are the most technical of the assignments that you will encounter. In other words, there's really only one answer that will get you 100% on the assignment. And that is if your dimensions are accurate to what we prescribe as being the dimensions for each classical cut, and also that you're showing cuts at 90 degrees in order to have square sides and cubes, for example, for presentation, and that all of your cuts are consistent throughout your quantity presented. And that's difficult. But if you're not there yet, that's okay. Our goal is for you to present your skill level right now so that we can provide you some feedback. And again, knowing that you're going to continue developing this core skill that will make cooking so much easier, faster, and more enjoyable. Okay. And so that's my pep talk about knife skills. So keep on practicing. All right. So let's go ahead and jump on into today's list of questions. And the first one, let's see, is a two-part question that reads, what's the difference between a spice and a seasoning? And number two, what's the difference between a broth, a bone broth, and a stock? Okay, we have these are a couple of nice questions. And so let me jump on into the first one here. And that is differentiating these terms spice and seasoning, which we use a lot, very casually, as we grow up around food and cooking. First of all, a spice is something specific, right? Something like black pepper or turmeric or cardamom, or something that provides flavor and aroma, to a food. And so that it generally is or maybe I should say more specifically, is going to point at these types of ingredients. These are going to be secondary, sometimes even tertiary flavorings, but very valuable, in terms of providing the flavor and aroma and ultimately the enjoyment to that finished dish. Clearly, some regional cuisines around the world feature spices more prominently than others. As we look at perhaps Euro-American cuisine, there's not a lot of spices featured, relatively speaking. Arguably we might find more herbs. But if we look at, say, Indian cuisine, this is perhaps the classic example, because so many of the spices that we are familiar with have their origins in South Asia. Whether it's the cardamom or black pepper or something else, these all originated from that part of the world. And so they play a very strong role in daily cooking, in all the meals of the day, in all styles of cooking. And, if you've dabbled in Indian cooking at all, you will understand that it's not just 2 or 3 spices that are called for, but it might be 5 or 10 or 15 spices that are routinely called for in a given preparation. But nonetheless, spices again provide the flavor and aroma that are very interesting and enjoyable to these particular dishes. Now, the term seasoning, this is a little more nebulous here, a little more hard to pin down, but generally speaking, I would say, especially in a professional context, we talk about seasoning as pertaining to the use of salt primarily, but also acidity, because those two tastes are so important to balancing a dish and also so noticeable on the palate. And so we tend to connect those to the immediate enjoyment of a dish. So if, in other words, if a dish is kind of flat, tasting on the palate, then we talk about adding more seasoning. And very commonly what we do is we adjust the salt level and or the acidity. Okay. Now, when it comes to other products on the market, I certainly see spice blends that are labeled as seasonings, and so this is I would say a consumer term more than a professional term, at least in my experience. Okay. And then on the note of salt and uh, acidity, I'll mention just a couple of thoughts that come to mind. Number one was salt. Is that on one hand, salt is salty, but salt is also accompanied by other subtle flavors based upon the place of origin. And to use a wine term, terroir comes to mind. Is this idea of the other minerals, the clays and ash and other things that might be part of the salt. And all of these provide the salt with different flavors, even though the base taste is salty. Okay, so hence we've got, salt from Hawaii and the salt from Normandy and northern France and the different parts of the world that have different cachet, different value, different, a different type of enjoyment. And ultimately, you can use any of these for your cooking. It's all just dependent upon your personal preference, in my opinion. Of course, some of these things become very expensive, and so price might filter what you choose to use. Okay. Regarding acidity, note that there are a number of different sources of acidity when it comes to cooking. We have vinegar and the many types of vinegars. So the thing to keep in mind is that on one hand, acidity provides the taste of sourness or tartness, but there are many accompanying flavors depending on the source of that acidity. So, for example, if you've got a white, what we call white vinegar or distilled vinegar, there's not a lot of accompanying flavor with that. But if you have rice vinegar or raspberry vinegar or red wine vinegar, balsamic vinegar, all of these present acidity, but also a different accompanying flavor. And so choose your flavor based upon what food it's going into. And then also, of course, note that these vinegars will often have different colors to them. And so some of them will impart a dark color, others a pink color, whereas others are more neutral, like champagne wine or champagne vinegar, distilled vinegar, rice vinegar, for example. So, choose your vinegars according to your desired outcome. Now, other possible sources of acidity include citrus fruits. Some are more acidic than others. Others have more sweetness that are notable. But lemons and limes come to mind, as do the yuzu and oranges and so many other members of that citrus group, depending on where you might live in the world. Now, just a quick tangent here when it comes to citrus fruits. Right now, we're talking about citrus as a source of acidity, but then also, right, there are different accompanying flavors. Now, that flavor in a big way is going to come from the zest of the fruit, whereas the acidity is primarily going to come from the juice of that fruit. So, understand that difference, give it a test so that you can better understand, this concept. And then also, understand that the zest of an orange, of a lemon, of a lime, for example, has a lot of value, a lot of aromatic value. Remember, aroma equals flavor. This idea of flavor is said to be 75% or 80% based upon smell, right? Our ability to pick up the aroma of a particular substance or the resulting dish that we produce. Okay. And so, what I like to do whenever possible is to pull off the zest of the lemon and then juice it so that I can use both components and really capture the full value of that fruit. All right. Other sources of acidity include tamarind. Tamarind also is accompanied by some fruitiness, a little bit of earthiness from that fruit. And then there are other things from around the world, like kokum. Kokum is a tree fruit from India, very common on the West Coast, and you'll see that as a souring agent. So go ahead and experiment with these different things and swap one in and out and see how you can change the results and really have more control over your cooking. Okay, and so that's my answer to part one. Now on to part two. What's the difference between a broth, a bone broth, and a stock? Okay, so my quick answer is they're really the same thing. Okay, this might come as a surprise to you because both in our Ruby courses, we talk about stock and broth as something different. And also, if you look at other sources, other cookbooks and websites, many people talk about broths and stocks as being, fundamentally different things. But I'm here to tell you that they're fundamentally the same thing with some nuanced differences. Okay, now I've read through historical texts, La Russe Gastronomique, among other textbooks that focus on the history of stock and broth development in the classical kitchen. And I've also taken a look at product labels at the grocery store and have compared bone broth and stock and broth. And, you look at the names on packages, you look at the ingredients, and then you see that they're the same thing. They're just labeled differently. Okay, so let me provide some broader context. Okay, a broth and a stock, yeah, they're a little different, but they reside on the same spectrum. Okay, where a stock is at one end and a broth is at the other end. So a stock, we think about as being a flavorful liquid that is based on bones. In this case, I'm going to use the example of bone stock. Okay, so stock, again, we talk about being based upon bones, whereas broth, we talk about being based on meat. All right, so if we go back in time, all right, this idea of making stock from bones was based on the concept of utilization, right? The efficient kitchen. Bones are a byproduct of butchering, where we're going to remove the muscle that has higher value because we can cook all kinds of dishes with that. And so what's left over is a bunch of bones. Now, there's still flavor in that. There's still flavor value that can be extracted via the simmering process, that moist heat cooking method. Okay. And so that's where this idea of stock comes from. Whereas, again, a broth is said to be based upon meat. Okay, so let's talk about the similarity, because in the middle of that spectrum here is where there's significant overlap. And you're going to, I hope, understand what I mean when I say that these flavorful liquids, a stock and a broth, are fundamentally the same thing. Okay, now, based upon my experience and, again, things that I've read, if you're fabricating a chicken, let's say, and you're putting bones into the pot of water to make stock, right? This idea of stock, then, I mean, depending on your butchering skills, there might be a little bit of meat left on the bones. Okay, so we start to get closer toward what a broth is, right? Based upon meat. And there are times when there are just sort of meat scraps left that ought to be utilized because they have value, flavor value in them. So we just put those into the stock pot along with the bones. And so here we have the introduction of even more meat, right, into that pot. So hopefully you can see where a stock, while sort of fundamentally we talk about it as being based upon bones, it can certainly have meat in the pot. There's nothing wrong with that, so long as from a value perspective, you're comfortable with that. Okay. In other words, especially, okay, in a business setting, again, the meat has more value being prepared and sold as some other preparation than being simmered in water, and that flavorful water or liquid then being used in cooking. Okay. Um, and then when it comes to making a broth, okay, let me take a little tangent here and also mention the usage of these terms. Okay, then I'll come back to the comparison here. But the term stock is used as an ingredient in a preparation, whereas the term broth is used to describe the finished product, such as in a menu description. Okay, so that's going to be another difference between these terms and how they're used. Okay, so back to the production, okay, of these flavorful liquids. It's not unheard of, okay, in a professional kitchen, for example, that if we want to make a chicken broth, right, some sort of a chicken soup that's going to be served, that we first make stock and then we add meat to that to finish, and then we call it a broth. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. That's part of the sort of the efficiency and the scale of operation that we might find in a restaurant, just as an example. Okay, so this is why I say that stock and a broth are fundamentally the same. They're at opposite ends of the spectrum, with a lot of overlap in the middle. Okay. Again, we from a consumer standpoint, from a popular culture standpoint, we tend to separate the two. But I should say, but they are fundamentally the same. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up from Peggy, enjoying the professional whole food plant-based course. Unit intros recommend reviewing activities and to shop based on one's needs, but recipes are for a large amounts for one person. What's the best way to cut a recipe and meet the requirements, as well as the recipes in general? Okay, so this is certainly a question that we get from time to time. And most of our recipes that you'll find in the courses are, they yield a pretty typical amount of food that you would find with recipes in a cookbook or other websites. And that is, they're going to feed 4 to 6 people, generally speaking. Okay. So in order to adjust the recipe, for recipes of that small quantity, 4 to 6, okay, you can easily cut the recipe in half to begin with. And you're going to come up with, say, 2 or 3 portions. If you wanted to bring it down even further to 1 portion, you might need to do some testing in order to sort of fine tune certain ingredients. And those certain ingredients tend to be the spices and the seasonings. Okay, to go back to that earlier question. So spices are pungent, and seasonings, as I described them, meaning sources of saltiness and sourness, tend to be pretty strong as well. And so very often we need to sort of take a more nuanced approach when it comes to those items of concentrated taste or flavor. Okay, but start off by simply having the recipe, and then make further adjustments as you desire. Okay, everyone's palate preference is going to be different, and so you get to make some final adjustments to see how you might like it. All right. Now, on the note of recipe adjustments. So if we're dealing with small recipes and overall small quantities or small yields, then this idea of cutting a recipe in half or doubling a recipe is pretty easily done and pretty safely done. In other words, you can just kind of use the ingredient quantities as they are written, and you're most likely going to come up with results that are the same as the original recipe. It's when we start to, say, expand a recipe by 5 times or 10 times because we've got just a large crowd to serve, or perhaps you want to turn this recipe into a menu item at your cafe or your restaurant, and you need to really scale up. In that case, we definitely need to do some recipe testing, again, especially of those more pungent items, those more sort of intensely concentrated ingredients, and then make adjustments. So, the sort of the classic scenario is that if you're scaling up a recipe, you can take all those main ingredients, the mirepoix and whatever those main ingredients are, and just multiply it by 5 or 10 to get started. But when it comes to spices, for example, take a more judicious approach. And instead of multiplying it by 5, just multiply it by 2. And then taste and test and then make adjustments. And then find that place that's going to be best in terms of overall balance. Okay. So that, generally speaking, right, is the approach to take to recipe adjustments when it comes to quantities. All right. But Peggy, hopefully that'll get you there. Just cut those recipes in half and then see if you can even cut them in half further if that better suits your situation, keeping an eye on those most concentrated ingredients such as spices. Thank you. All right. Next question from Cherie. Hello and happy Thanksgiving. So how do you store an open bottle of Madeira wine? And part 2 here, I was also wondering, since you studied in Portland, Oregon, did you try the wines there? And if so, how do you like the Oregon wines? So you have a couple of nice questions here. So, when I'm around, there's no such thing as leftover Madeira. All right. No, I'm kidding. Once again, any leftover Madeira goes into the refrigerator. That's my preference anyway, because it slows down that metabolic process and it's going to extend the shelf life of that product. Keeping, with that in mind, I should say, also keep in mind that you should use the product. So, think about future menus or other things that you can make that will allow you to use up that product while it's still in its freshest state. Let me also add that all of these fortified wines, Madeira being one of them, fundamentally they're drinking wines, right? They're beverages. And so, so long as I would say you're buying a product that is of, moderate to better quality, and is enjoyable on your palate, then also consider sipping on it, and enjoying it as a beverage. Okay. And as I mentioned, the term fortified wine. A fortified wine, of which there are many. Madeira is one, Marsala is one, Port is a common example, and there are many others as well. But these fundamentally are wines, or at least originally they were table wines, still wines that had brandy, a neutral brandy added to them as a preservative so that these products could be transported over long distances, often in rather hot climates where a typical table wine would decline pretty quickly. And so the addition of brandy would stabilize that product. And so, today, if you note the alcohol content of beverages like Madeira or port or Marsala compared to your more typical table wine, then you're going to notice that the alcohol percentage is closer to, say, 20%, maybe 18%, compared to maybe 10 or 12 or 13% for a table wine. All right. So, consequently, something like Madeira does have a longer shelf life than a still wine because of this higher alcohol content. But again, it does decline. So please enjoy it when it's freshest. All right. And then let's see, part 2 of your question here, Cherie, says, is asking about wines in Oregon. Okay. Yes. So once upon a time, I did study culinary arts here in Portland. I reside on the west side of town and not far from wine country. In fact, I'm literally just a few minutes away from the nearest winery at the north end of the Willamette Valley here. And then you can spend the entire summer driving south and hitting wineries. But, in terms of the Oregon wine industry, it's a long one. I think like many wine producing regions in the United States, the wine industry here dates back to the mid 1800s with the early settlers, on the West Coast. And, but it wasn't until the late 1960s, early 1970s when I'd say the roots, pun intended, okay, the roots of today's wine industry were planted. And it was in 1979. This is a fun story. 1979, an Oregon winemaker named David Lett, who founded Eyrie Vineyards, and I think they're in Dundee, just down about 45 minutes away from here, traffic depending. He entered a Pinot Noir into a wine competition in France, and he won first place, beating out other French Pinot Noirs. And so that very quickly placed Oregon on the map, so to speak, of a region that produces or has the potential to produce quality wine. And it was shortly after that, and this is back in the early 80s, I can remember a commercial, a TV commercial, where there were a couple of French winemakers looking at a map of the United States. And this is all about Oregon wines, okay? And they found Oregon on the map. And between the two of them, they were saying, oh, well, this looks like a suburb of California. California wines having already been established at that point and notable. And Oregon wines, and Oregon itself was really an unknown sort of a place. But thanks to David Lett and Pinot Noir, that was really the beginning, I think, of more notoriety around the world for Oregon wines. Now, I think currently Oregon has 18 AVAs, so American Viticultural Areas, these officially designated grape growing regions. Depending on the climate and depending on the terroir, right, which is the flavor that the wine picks up from all of the natural elements, whether it's the soil composition or the rain quantity, the sunlight quantity, the temperature, the cloudiness, all those sort of elements, all rolled into one, are referred to as the terroir. And so generally speaking, from about Portland, right, where I am, south through the Willamette Valley is a relatively cool part of the world. And, hence, a wine like Pinot Noir grows very well here, has been compared in quality to Burgundian, Pinot Noirs, which have been the standard bearer, right, of quality for a very, very long time. But if we get outside of the Willamette Valley, first of all, east of the Cascade Mountain Range into central and eastern Oregon, but in this case along the Columbia River, which separates Oregon from Washington, we get into much warmer or even hotter climates. And so there's a whole different set of AVAs and style of wine. So namely, bigger red wines and overall wines that really thrive in hotter conditions. And this is also true of the AVAs that are located in southern Oregon. So basically from Eugene, which is at the southern end of the Willamette Valley, from Eugene down to the California border. That's a relatively hot or warm or hot region of the state. And so there's a whole different set or menu of wines that are produced down there. But there are many, many different styles. From what I describe as more traditional profiles, European sort of flavor profiled wines where the soil flavor, the minerals, for example, are much more prominent, to more modern styles of wine where the fruitiness is forward. And for a lot of Americans, those are easier to drink, for example. Okay. But the quality here, some of it is top notch, and depends on how much, your budget is, like so many other food products. But certainly, to spend time in the wine regions of Oregon is a popular summertime pastime for a lot of tourists. And I think a lot of fun. Make arrangements ahead of time because it can get pretty crowded. All right. There's also bicycle tours of wineries during the summertime, which can be very fun. Okay. But do keep in mind, right, that drinking and driving a bicycle will also get you in trouble around here. Just saying. All right. Thank you. And next up, I make my veggie stock from scraps I've accumulated. Can you give me some tips to ensure that I consistently get good results? And secondly, I want to make a raw cranberry relish not using cane sugar. Can you recommend a recipe or give me tips on creating? Okay, so the first one regarding stock production from the accumulation of scraps, right? Cut pieces that one accumulates. I think this is a smart way to go. This idea of the frugal kitchen, right? Cooking frugally, but even more generally, just living frugally is a really smart way to go, in my opinion. But when it comes to making stock, we keep scraps in the freezer. And then when we have a quantity that's sufficient to make a batch of stock that we're planning on, then we go forth. And I think that's probably the number one tip that I would share is to keep those scraps freshest longest. Do keep them in the freezer, unless you find yourself in a very sort of a short cycle of making stock, let's say on a weekly basis, then you can certainly keep those scraps in the refrigerator. But certainly any scraps that you might use in a stock should also be things that you're willing to put in your mouth and eat if you had to. Okay, so nothing should be of a B rate to going into your stock. All right. And then otherwise, start with the ratios that we recommend, with, whether it's, mirepoix or other ingredients, and then experiment from there. It really is up to you. The beauty of cooking is once you learn the fundamentals, right, that that we teach you, then you have control, and you can make changes and you can call it your own at that point. So if you want to, decrease the celery because you want less of that grassy vegetal flavor and some of that bitterness, and you want to, enhance more of the sweetness from the onions and the carrots, then make that adjustment. If you want to put in garlic, if you want to put in some, some star anise and some kaffir lime leaves because you want to take it to a Southeast Asian flavor profile, then you can do all of those things. But learn the rules first, and then have fun with it. Okay. And then the next part regarding cranberry relish minus cane sugar, I would say very simply, just look for another source of sweetener that you prefer to use, whether it's beet sugar or something else. And just give it a try and see how you like it. I use, for example, whole leaf stevia. I don't use the processed white powder that I see at the store, but I have whole leaf stevia in a dried form that I like to use for a lot of applications. But as an example, stevia, it's an herb, so it's got some accompanying flavors to it that some people don't like. And so do keep in mind that if you choose something like honey or stevia or something else, that not only does it have sweetness, but it has the accompanying flavor, right, of that item. And so think about that relative to your desired end result. Okay. Thank you. And next up, looks like Cherie is back. Let's see, learning about balsamic vinegars in Unit 6 and loving it. Would you please share some of your favorite brands of the quality balsamic vinegars? Okay, let me take a quick sip here, and then I'll get to answering your question. So, to begin with, when it comes to balsamic vinegars, broadly speaking, there are a couple of categories. And so when you say quality balsamics, I'm not sure which category you refer to, so I'll talk about both of them. At the upper echelon, you've got the traditional balsamic vinegars, and those are made over a long period of time, bound by many rules that are part of the designation, right, of traditional balsamic or balsamico tradizionale. And for example, traditional balsamic vinegars, they must be aged, and at a minimum it's a dozen years, and some of them are aged for well over 50 years, and that takes a big investment. There's a lot of risk involved, therefore, and a lot of evaporation of product along the way as these things age in wooden barrels or casks. And so consequently, the finished product tends to be relatively expensive. Now, in that category of balsamic vinegars, while, I have, used and tasted probably a couple of dozen or so, over the years, I don't have a particular favorite. I don't recall doing a taste test. It was always something that was, given to me to use for a dinner, these sort of things. And this is just part of cooking professionally. These sort of opportunities come up. So, I don't have a particular brand name or producer name to share with you. However, at that level of quality, I've never been disappointed. I've never second guessed or questioned the quality of those products. And I would imagine that most consumers are going to find 4.5 star or 5 star ratings out of 5 stars. If you look at ratings on any of these sites, such as Amazon, for example. Um, give it a try. See how much money you want to spend on a given product, and you might even try picking up 2 or 3 in order to compare. Noting, of course, that the traditional balsamics are not used in cooking, but rather used to finish a preparation. Okay. Now, the second category is often referred to as commercial balsamic vinegars. And this category varies widely in the method of production as well as the resulting quality of the product. Generally speaking, within this category, you can find products that may fall under a rating system that's called the leaf rating system, and it's 1 through 4 leaves, and these are grape leaves, and 4 being a higher quality product than a 1 leaf designation. Okay, but in terms of production, generally speaking, but with some exceptions here, especially at the lower end of quality, these products may be based in part on better quality balsamic vinegar, with the addition of red wine vinegar in order to bulk it up or to stretch the yield of that particular product. These vinegars under this separate category and rating system may be aged in wood, or they may not be. Now, the duration of aging in wood will vary, and you would really need to look at different producers and do some comparisons on your own to find what you enjoy. But generally speaking, a lower rated balsamic vinegar in the commercial balsamic category is going to be more acidic and less sweet in profile. And a balsamico in this category that has a higher rating, 3 leaves or 4 leaves, will have a better quality base. It'll feature more sweetness, a better balance with acidity, or overall lower acidity on the palate. And so an item that's more sour, more tart, can easily be used for balsamic vinegars, blended with other ingredients, and enjoyed in that manner. And then when you get into the 3 and 4 leaf rated products within this commercial balsamic category, where you have more sweetness, these can be used for finishing as well. They're not quite as refined at that more subtle level as the traditional balsamics, but they can be very enjoyable. And certainly from a price point perspective, they are much more accessible than the traditional balsamicos. And, one label that I am familiar with is from the Stutz company. And Stutz is a small bottler in the East San Francisco Bay Area. And they have a balsamic vinegar. It falls into this commercial balsamic category. It's a 3 leaf rated product. The base product is from Modena, where you have a lot of the traditional balsamics coming from. And this one I find to be fairly nicely balanced between the sweetness and the acidity. I use it generally for finishing as well as for dressings. And I've even enjoyed it over ice cream from time to time. And I don't have any hesitation in saying, check it out and see how you might like it. Now, interestingly, even if you were to compare, let's say, this Stutz product with other 3-leaf rated balsamicos, you might find profiles that are quite different. So it's still important that you compare, 2 or 3 labels, let's say, in order to find something that you enjoy. Okay, but give Stutz a try. I just actually just had some this morning. Gave it a little sprinkle on a parsley and cilantro salad that I had before the live event, and very, very enjoyable. All right. Thank you. Next question. How can you convince your friends and family that a whole food plant-based diet is so much healthier than the SAD diet? This is one of those perennial issues that many cooks struggle with as they make transition from the standard American diet, the so-called standard American diet, to the happier plant-based diet. And that's certainly a question that I get from time to time. And now, on one hand, if your audience is amenable to reading some of the research summaries, some of the studies that have been published about the effects of more plants in the diet or a 100% plant-based diet, then they might be convinced. They might move over to this side of the aisle, so to speak. But that can be a hard sell. And part of that is very simply that it's part of our culture. And I'm based in the United States, and so definitely in the U.S., meat is huge. It's called the center of the plate in the restaurant industry and even at the consumer level in some contexts, because it is so important culturally to us. And then the other sort of part of this story is that we promote protein in our diet so strongly, and animal sources of food are connected with protein so strongly that it's very hard to convince someone, even after they have seen what would seem like plenty of evidence of what certainly a heavy animal diet can do versus a heavy plant-based diet to the inside of one's body. You can certainly take that approach, but it could be a long road. Don't give up, but be balanced, I think, in the approach. That's what I would suggest. The other thing is, just very simply start making tasty plant-based dishes. And there's no reason necessarily, right, why a person or a household needs to make the change 100% in cold turkey, right? This is the Thanksgiving week after all. And you can make a gradual change and introduce plant-based foods or a more heavily plant-based menu to your audience, and just talk to them about tasty food, first of all. I mean, after all, that's how we enjoy our meals, right? We're not eating protein, right? We're not having a meal of carbohydrates per se. We're sitting down to enjoy a meal. And then it's certainly, some people have the thought in their mind that it needs to nourish their body in a certain way, but really we choose certain foods even to nourish our bodies because they taste good. And I think that's the avenue to take. And in order to get there, right, we need to build up our cooking skills and our knowledge and understanding of ingredients and the cooking process and all of the supporting techniques that go into the joys of cooking. All right, so it's a long journey. It's the longue durée, right? As we say in anthropology. So be prepared, but don't give up. Enjoy the journey. All right, thank you. All right, Madeline says thank you. Thank you, Madeline. I appreciate your comment, and hope that you're enjoying your journey through your Ruby course, or even just the live event. If you dropped in, just to see what's going on today, and enjoy cooking. Thank you. Next up from Lawrence. Hello. How do I replace a substitute for oil in salad dressing or in cooking for people who are trying to avoid these ingredients due to health reasons? Okay. So if I'll provide a couple of answers. Okay. So number one, if you want to create a vinaigrette style dressing, but without oil, then one idea is to use apple juice in place of the oil, in that quantity, but lightly thicken the apple juice with a slurry, such as an arrowroot slurry or a cornstarch slurry. And in fact, I would probably let's see, start with a cornstarch slurry in terms of stability, I believe. And that's going to require a little bit of extra time because you need to bring it to a simmer in order to activate the thickening power of the cornstarch. And then you have to chill it and then adjust the viscosity so it more closely matches the oil that you're replacing. Okay, and then you can make the dressing. Now, you don't have to use apple juice. You can use some other flavorful liquid. Ideally, it's going to be a flavorful liquid. It could be stock as well. I should always mention stock. But a flavorful liquid is preferred. And then, try to, again, mimic the viscosity of the oil that you're replacing. And then that'll get you to something that is in the vinaigrette category. All right. And if you're interested in other sort of creamy based or textures of dressings, then you can use things like avocado or tofu and perhaps even other ingredients. But those two are pretty common as bases for creamy style dressings. And in our courses, as well as in our library of recipes, we offer a handful of ideas to get you started in this area of no oil dressings. All right. Thank you. All right. So next up, next question here. Hello, Estella. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well. How can I make my vegetables healthier? Raw or roast or steam? Okay, so there's a lot of discussion, right, around the preservation of nutrients, and a lot of people might favor raw vegetables. Because they're concerned about the degradation of nutrients due to the heat of cooking. All right. Some of that's true. Okay. But not necessarily all of it. Okay. The fun thing about nutrition is that it's pretty complex. And what we know about nutrition is really the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. That's what I believe. When it comes to raw foods, certainly there are nutrients that are best preserved in that state. Okay. The challenge is that raw foods, when compared to their cooked counterparts, they're generally more difficult to digest. And I mean, ultimately, our body will assimilate nutrients after digestion has taken place. All right. So if we put something in our mouth that we think is chock full of the best nutrients, but our body has a hard time breaking it down because it's raw, then we might not be extracting the nutrients to the fullest as we might think we are. Okay. Now, on the other hand, there are certain nutrients that are made more bioavailable after cooking. Okay. And so, really, at the table, in terms of the menu composition, you're probably going to be best off if you're eating some of both, some raw vegetables and some cooked vegetables. Now, in terms of roasting or steaming, that's totally up to you, ultimately, of course. But keep in mind that dry heat cooking methods, so roasting or grilling or sautéing, gives you the chance. Excuse me a second here. It gives you the chance to impart browning. Okay, the caramelization or the browning, due to the Maillard reaction, it's the development of flavor as well as the visual appeal that we see. But in this case, we're talking about flavor, and so you've got a certain type of flavor profile. It's going to be deeper. It's going to be more rounded. That can be developed via the dry heat cooking methods, and you don't get that with moist heat methods like steaming or simmering. Okay, but it's so the finished the end flavor profile is simply different. I'm not going to split hairs and say that steaming is better than grilling or roasting is better than simmering. It really depends on what you're trying to do with your food. And this is really the beauty of understanding cooking, because you get to choose your cooking method right from your toolkit, so to speak, and deploy it in the manner that you wish in order to create the finished product that you imagine. Okay. And so try it out. Try your carrots or celery or whatever in a raw form, in a roasted form, and then also in a steamed form, and compare the texture, compare the aroma, compare the flavor development, and then think about the additional flavorings that you will pair with those vegetables, whether it's herbs or spices or what have you, and then see what is going to be most compatible and most enjoyable for you and your audience. Okay. Also keep in mind that, because raw vegetables, especially certain raw vegetables, they're harder to chew. So we need to also choose our knife cuts appropriately and basically cut them smaller very often in order to bring more enjoyability to the eating experience. Okay. So again, just another example of how our skill development, in this case, knife skill development, can go a long way in giving us control in the kitchen to design and create a dish that is purposeful, that is going to be most enjoyable, based upon the ingredients that are used. Okay. But any of those I think could be healthy. You might want to consider minimizing added fat. That's certainly the opinion of a lot of people out there when it comes to health or the healthfulness of a given dish. Okay. But otherwise, this is a good time for you to practice using spices. I'm a big fan of spices. And, spices can be used, with oil, without oil. They can be used whole, they can be used ground. And in order to impart aroma, which equals flavor, and visual interest to your finished dish. All right. Thank you. And next up from Sharon. Hello. When you first went vegan, was it difficult? I tried vegan for 5 months. Then Thanksgiving came and I went off. That was 3 years ago. Okay. So let me first say that I am not a full-time plant-based consumer. Although certainly by far the majority of my dietary intake is plant-based. I think I can easily say, in the mid 90% range. I'm enjoying plant-based foods, and I certainly go for stretches of time when that's all I eat is plants of some sort or another. But I don't necessarily mind eating something from the animal kingdom ever so often. But I understand what you're saying. And so, is it difficult? Yes, I think for many of us it is. Um, for a couple of reasons. One, I mentioned a few minutes ago, right? Culturally, especially in the United States or other sort of carnocentric societies, meat is very important psychologically. And, very often when we go to create a meal that is plant-based, we are thinking of that in the context of replicating the meat-based original, so to speak. And in other words, we always have meat on the mind if that's the place from which we're working. And so the psychological element is a big one, and that's where we have to make that initial shift to understand that a plant-based dish doesn't have to be, in fact, in my opinion, shouldn't be, this is just my own food culture, a replica of a meat dish. A plant-based dish can be just as flavorful and enjoyable in its own right, and doesn't need to be compared with a meat preparation. And so if we can disconnect those two psychologically, it really goes a long way in making life a lot easier. Okay. And that's also going to be related to the physiology. Okay. Because so much of what we feel physically is triggered by our mental state. And the mental state is that emotional, psychological piece that I just addressed. And so once we think about a plant-based dish or a menu as being as legitimate, as tasty as a meat-based dish or menu that you might have grown up with, then mentally we're at ease, and then physically we are at ease. And so I think that's the first step that one should consider if they're having some struggles with going plant-based 100%, if that's your desire, right? Or staying on that course, okay? When it comes to Thanksgiving, this is huge, right? I mean, Thanksgiving is full of symbolism, and symbolism, that symbology, right, is so important to people. And what's at the center of that that ideal picture of Thanksgiving, right? It's a turkey, right? It's this big hunk of meat, and when we take that away, all of a sudden, it seems like we don't have Thanksgiving because we're just left with these side dishes. All right. So again, the psychological piece there is to recognize that, well, we can replace the turkey with some other preparation that can be a center of the table, right? It could be a main dish, such as a plant-based manicotti, right? Or some other, maybe a casserole. I mean, it could be something else like cauliflower steaks. And I love that particular assignment, by the way, that many of you will encounter in your courses. But the table is going to look different. And so you got to be okay with that as you make that transition. And then all those other side dishes, right? Whether it's Brussels sprouts or root vegetables or cranberries or dressing or something else. I mean, all of those things are very enjoyable, right? And in fact, there are many people out there that the day after Thanksgiving enjoy those things even more than the turkey, right? So think about that. Are you one of those people? But nonetheless, um, it's a matter of allowing yourself to enjoy what you have rather than thinking about what you don't have. All right. And that can be applied to so many other areas in life. All right. So I hope that helps. Thank you. All right. Next question. Hello. When measuring, are there specific cups and spoons to use? I have 3 sets of measuring cups, glass, melamine, and stainless, and 2 sets of measuring spoons. 1 set of spoons are from England and are much larger than the spoons I use. Interesting question here. So our recipes in our courses are for better or for worse at present, they are largely based on U.S. measures and cups and spoons, largely speaking. Okay, there is a slow transition in place here, but don't hold your breath. It's going to take a while. But back to your question here. So please, first of all, use to start with, if you can, those U.S. Equivalents, cups and spoons. And, when it comes to measuring cups, there are 2 types. If you are measuring dry ingredients, especially for baking, although ideally you'd be using a scale, but if you are using a cup, then the ideal cup is going to have the measure go all the way to the top of the cup so that you can fill it up and then scrape the top of the cup in order to get a nice level measure of flour, for example. Okay. Now, if you're measuring liquid, then typically we're using a cup that might have the measure somewhere below the top edge of that vessel so that we can fill it up with a liquid to 1 cup, for example, and then we can move that and pour it, as we need to without spilling it. And so that's the difference between the 2 types of cups. But otherwise, whatever you have is going to be fine. I've seen and I've used many types of spoons and cups made of ceramic and stone and wood and so on and so forth, and they all work just fine. Okay. In the end, I'll take this a little bit beyond, the U.S. cups and spoons. Once you make a recipe a couple of times and you come to understand what it's doing, you're going to have the knowledge to make adjustments as you desire and make adjustments to the equipment that you have, the utensils that you have, and the desired outcomes that you want. So you might choose to use measuring, vessels that are entirely different. That could just be some container that you picked up that looks really nice aesthetically, and you decide to use it to measure your liquids and your flour, and you can make the recipe work with your experience. But again, that's where, once again, practicing and developing your knowledge and your skill set will take you to the finish line. Okay, so enjoy the journey and have some fun along the way. All right, thank you. All right, and then the last item here, this is from Marion in Maine. Good day to you. And Marion writes, as we come to Thanksgiving here in the U.S., I am thankful for all the people that make Ruby the outstanding organization that it is. Thanks for your expertise, diligence, and compassion. we, the students, are thankful for you. Thank you so much, Marion, for your comment, for your feedback. And on behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to say thank you. Um, we appreciate all of you being here for sure. And, as one of your instructors, in the courses, and, as one of your instructors, specifically in this case, Marion, I appreciate having you in the course and having all of you right in the courses and seeing your work, seeing your progression. Just very quickly, I'll mention that Marion is a graduate of the Forks Over Knives course. She just recently enrolled in the Pro Plant course. Just submitted her knife skills assignments, which I graded, I think it was yesterday, and I compared her assignments to her FOK assignments, and there was so much improvement. And I was very excited to see that. And, I thank all of you for taking the time out of your day and your week to improve your cooking skills, because it's so meaningful, right, on an individual level, and for your families and friends and all the other people that you might cook for. Enjoy, again, enjoy the process, enjoy the journey, and happy Thanksgiving to all of you. And until next time, happy cooking. Thank you very much.